statement of Suzanne Foster regarding a book she found during her tenure as librarian of Winchester College. Original statement given January 7th, 2025. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, Head Archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. I'm still here, still trapped. I can feel the weight of the walls pressing against me. The painted world around me, painted but so terribly real, wraps itself like a straitjacket at the edges of the windows I cannot open, the door I cannot touch, the sun whose warmth I shall never feel. I've long given up screaming. My voice is as muted as the desaturated brushstrokes that line the walls. It started with a book. It always does. I suppose I should explain. I should start from the beginning. But I don't know if I can. What's the point in beginning when the end is already here, locked in a room with no door, no way out? But for you, maybe it would make more sense if I tell it from the start, as though there is some reason I should have known. I should have left well enough alone. The school archives were my sanctuary, a quiet place where the smell of old paper and dust filled the air. I'd spent hours there since my first day at Winchester College, combing through the forgotten remnants of past students and their work. Most of it was dull, piles of old textbooks, journals half-eaten by time. But there was something so intoxicating about the idea that I might unearth something no one else had seen. And on that day, I found it. A leather-bound book, tucked away behind a pile of discolored parchment. It was thicker than most books I'd seen in the archives, the dark mottled leather cold to the touch, the emblem embossed on the cover gleaming as though it had never been touched by age. The school motto: Manners maketh man. I didn't think much of it then. It sounded pretentious and stuffy, which I suppose suited the hallowed establishment. I turned it over in my hands. The weight of it felt odd, as though it knew, as though it was eager to be read. I pulled the book off the shelf and dusted it off, glancing at the shelves around me. No one else was around. No one would see me take it, so I did. I tucked it under my arm, eager to explore. When I opened the book in my flat later that night, I was expecting a dry history of the school, some ancient lecture on etiquette or social behavior. What I didn't expect was the strange, almost whimsical illustrations on the pages. At first, they seemed harmless, quirky little sketches of people, scenes from long-forgotten eras, all drawn in a rough, sketchy style. The sort of thing you might find in a high school yearbook from decades ago. But as I flicked through the pages, something began to shift. The drawings started to warp, as though the ink were alive. The people in the sketches began to shift and twist, their eyes following me as I turned the pages. Some of them even whispered. At first, it was so subtle I thought I was imagining it. But then, the whispers grew louder, a hissing sound that filled my ears, curling around me like a thick fog. Manners maketh man. The phrase echoed in my mind, cold and mocking. I snapped the book shut, heart pounding. My fingers tingled with an electric sensation. For a moment I felt as though the walls of my dorm were closing in. The world outside seemed distant, muted, like chewing the world through a paper bag. The only sound was my own breath, and the sound of the book's pages rustling in my hands. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something I shouldn't have, and it had seen me. It started small. I was walking to the dining hall where I overheard a conversation between a group of students, most of them senior girls. They were laughing, but their words, sharp and mean, stung I couldn't ignore. Without even thinking, I opened my mouth. "You really should mind how you address faculty," I said, loud enough to make them stop. "Maybe you should be more careful with your words." The words tasted strange as they left my mouth. The girls looked at me in shock, but I didn't have time to explain. I felt a strange pull in my chest, a pressure, like an invisible hand squeezing my heart. Something in the air shifted. And then, the girl, a tall, blonde girl with sharp features, suddenly crumpled into a heap. At first I thought she'd fainted, but when I rushed over, her body was flattened against the floor, becoming a lifeless, two-dimensional scrawl, as though she were painted there. A crude, black and white drawing of her collapsed form. Her eyes were wide, painting in terror. Her mouth half open in a scream that never started. I stared at her. Her form, once so vivid and alive, had been reduced to a grotesque, flat image. She lay sprawled on the floor in an unnatural pose, her body no longer a mass of flesh and bone, but a sickeningly lifeless sketch, as though the world had been reduced to a mere abstraction of itself, like a crime scene figure that had become a cruel blackboard drawing. The lines that once defined her were jagged and twisted and contorted in impossible ways. The sharp angles of her limbs had taken on a distorted, inhuman quality, almost as though the chalk had grown impatient with her. Her face, the last remnants of her human likeness, were frozen in a mockery of expression. The eyes, wide and staring, seemed to bulge from the floor, dark and empty, as if the very concept of sight had been drained from them. Her mouth, twisted in a frozen scream, gaped open unnaturally, exposing the jagged remains of what was once her throat. But it was her skin that repulsed me most. It was no longer the soft, warm tone of human flesh. Instead, it was flat, a lifeless shade of grey, stretched taut over her bones in a way that made it seem like the very fabric of her body had been erased, replaced with something far more sinister. I could almost see the strokes of chalk that had once defined her, a crude and uneven layering of smudges that twisted the shape of her body like some deranged artist had lost all sense of symmetry. Her hands had lost their fingers, smudged into an indistinct blur of half-formed limbs, the skin wrinkled and crumpled as if the canvas itself no longer could hold her shape. But there was no canvas. There was only the floor. And yet, even in her new form, there was something still undeniably there. A lingering sense of terror, a consciousness trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed its will. The sight of her, reduced to this, was enough to twist something deep inside of me, a sickness that bloomed in my chest. I looked around frantically, half expecting someone to come rushing over, to scream, to do something. No one seemed to notice that she had ceased to be a person. No one saw her collapse into this twisted, flat thing. It felt as if I were the only one who had seen the truth, the only one left to witness the horror. The whispers in my head grew louder, a choked, raspy breath escaping from the depths of my mind. It was as if the very air had become thick with dread, suffocating me in a way that wasn't entirely physical. I felt the book pulling at me again, tugging me back toward it, urging me to read more. And then, from the distorted figure on the floor came a sound. Soft at first, like the rustling of a page turning, but soon growing louder. A scraping noise. The sound of a chalk being dragged across a blackboard. The girl's head, unnaturally frozen in place, tilted ever so slightly. just enough to make her stare at me with those terrible, empty eyes. I didn't know what to do. I ran back to my room, the book clutched in my hands, my heart hammering in my chest, bile rising in my throat. The book didn't stop whispering to me. Manners, Maykth, man. The phrase became a drumbeat in my skull, echoing over and over until I could feel it in the base of my head and behind my eyes. At first, it was just small things. If someone were rude to me, they would become like her. A scrawled figure painted onto the walls of my world. The book seemed to guide me. The whispers told me when to speak, when to act, when to correct people. And with each incident it grew worse. The school started to change. Students disappeared, but not in any way you'd expect. They simply became part of the walls. And I saw it happen once or twice more to others. Some students dismissed it. Others looked too long, and I could see the worry in their eyes as they looked at me. But no one said anything out loud. Soon, it wasn't just the rude students. Anyone who spoke out of turn in the smallest way was consumed. Anyone who didn't hold the door for their elders. Anyone caught chewing gum in classes, or with a minor uniform infraction, or even not enunciating correctly as is proper and correct. They became part of the murals that dotted the school, flattened and distorted into painted scenes, frozen forever in their last moments of life. The corridor in the archives became more scrawled than hewn stone, faces overlapping and staring, vacant visages. I had to get out. I had to stop it, or I had to leave, quit the school, and maybe even leave Winchester. But now here I am, in this room. It's been days, weeks, maybe more. The painted windows show nothing but a cold grey sky that never changes. The door is a flat, painted illusion. I've tried to walk through it, but when I reach for the brass doorknob, it fades from real to vapid, coarse canvas. I've even tried to shout, but my voice falls dead in my throat, absorbed by the walls of the room that seems even smaller than it is. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I don't know if anyone will believe me. But if you find the book, if it speaks to you, don't listen. Don't ever listen. The motto is true, and it's too late for me. Manners maketh man. Statement ends.